Hello, David and Aaron. This is Daddy Eric here, and I'm going to tell you a story about Darth and Joe Vader. This story happened a long time ago when Darth Vader was 5 years old, and his cousin Joe Vader, who used to visit him at his house, was 3 years old. And one time, Joe was over visiting at Darth's house, and they were having breakfast, and Darth's mom was reading in the paper that an alien spaceship landed on their planet, and there was this big alien who was 20 feet tall, and no one could communicate it because it spoke a strange language, but it seemed to be very friendly. And she said, you know what we should do? We have a couple of days off now. It's Thanksgiving vacation. We should take the train over to the town where the alien landed and go see it and see if we can figure out what it's trying to say, see if we can learn to communicate with it. And Darth and Joe said, yeah, that sounds like a fun adventure. And so Darth and Joe went into the other room and they said, you know something? What we need is some sort of universal translator device, some machine that will hear what the alien says, and then the machine will speak English back to us so we can understand what the alien says. Maybe Dr. Zhivago in the in-between world has something like that. Joe thought that was a great idea. And so what they did was they were going to leave in a few hours to go see the alien on the train, so they had time to transport to the in-between universe. So they did that using one of their secret rings, and they landed in this large white room, and they walked over to Dr. Zhivago's house. Dr. Zhivago? Yes? Hi, it's me. It's Joe Vader and Darth Vader. Oh yes, it's good to see you, said Dr. Zhivago. Dr. Zhivago liked Darth and Joe. What can I do for you? Well, we're trying to communicate with this huge alien who's landed on our planet. Nobody knows what he has to say, and we want to figure out if there's a way of talking to him. We don't know his language. Oh, that's an interesting problem. What, you need some sort of translating device. That's right, and so that's why we came up here, said Darth and Joe. We were hoping that you would have something like that. Something that could hear the alien and then speak our language back so we could hear what the alien was saying. And Dr. Zhivago said, yes, I have just the thing. And he rummaged through some drawers. Wait, sorry, not over here. Hold on just a second. Ah, here it is. And it was about 2 inches long and 1 inch wide, and it looked like a clear plastic case, kind of like you would put a cassette tape into, but it was smaller. And Dr. Zhivago said, watch this. I'm going to say something in French. Au secours! And open up the cassette and see what it says back. Help! That's right. Au secours is help in French. So all you have to do is speak one language at this device, then you open it up and it'll speak your language back to you. And you can set it to speak any language you want. It's really an amazing device. You guys want to have it? We could have it? Sure, I've got lots of them. I've got a whole drawer full of them. In fact, I'll give one to each of you. And so Dr. Zhivago gave each one of them one of these translators, and they thanked him. They transported back to their world, and at no time had passed, because when you're in the in-between universe, time stands still in your universe. And they got ready with their mom. They packed some lunches, and they got on the train, and they started going. And it was a kind of nice train ride. Lots of nice scenery. And Darth and Joe, though, were bored, because they're used to transporting places. If they want to go to New York or Indiana or Chicago or Las Vegas, all they have to do is think about it with the ring, and they'll translate. They'll instantly appear there. And actually, the way it works, as you know, is through wormholes through space. So space bends, and they transport instantly to where they want to go. But since they were with their mom, and she can't transport because she doesn't have a ring, and besides, they don't like everybody to know they have the ring. They keep it secret. So they decided to take the train. So it was kind of a long trip. And Darth and Joe thought, man, this train, I wish they would put some kind of engine on it to make it go faster. And Joe thought, yeah, maybe we can work on that. Maybe we can make an extra fast train. People would like that. They'd be able to get places faster. So anyway, eventually, they got to where they were going, this city on the other side of a mountain on their planet where the alien had landed. And they got out of the train, and who should they see at the train station but Super Duper Man, Mayonnaise Man, and Nostril Man? old friends of Darth and Joe Vader, whom they had met some time ago, and they were happy to see each other. And Darth and Joe introduced Darth's mother to Super Duper Man, Mayonnaise Man, and Nostril Man, and they all got along very well. And Darth happened to mention to them that, gosh, you know, it took us a long time to get here because we can't. I mean, you guys probably flew. Super Duper Man just probably carried you. And he said, that's right. I carried us right over here. But we had to, Darth said, we had to take the train. And these trains are slow. They're old trains. I wish they would get some modern new trains. And Darth and Joe went, and Darth's mom started walking off to go visit the alien. And that's when Super Duper Man, Nostril Man, and Mayonnaise Man started thinking, hey, maybe we can come up with a way to make the trains faster. That would be a great service that we could provide for the community. And so they started thinking about that. What can we do to make the trains run faster? And they went back to their their hotel room that they were renting. It was like a little cabin they were renting while they stayed in this village, and they started thinking about it. In the meantime, Darth and Joe went and visited the alien, and it was a really big alien. It was about 20 feet tall and about 15 feet wide, and it looked like it was made out of rubber. And Darth and Joe said hello to the alien. Darth's mom said hello to the alien, and you know what the alien said? The alien said this.
Zoop-a-dee-doo, ba-bee-doo, ba-zoop-zop, zoop-bop, doop-a-doop-a-deep-dop, loop-a-doop-a-doop-bop, zoop-zoop, Aaron, ba-doop-a-doop-a-doop-a-doop-a-doop, doop-a-dee-doo-bop, zoop-boop-boop-boop, ba-doop-boop-boop-dop, doop-dop, ba-zoop-a-zoop-zoop-a-doo-doo-doo, David, ba-doop-a-doop-a-doop, ba-doop-a-dop, zoop-a-zoop-a-deep-dop, Benjamin zip zap zap zoop zoop Judith ba boop ba zoop ba Patrice ba doop ba doop ba ta ba doop ba doop ba doop da ba doop ba doop ba beep ba.
Well, Darth's mom said, I wonder what the alien was trying to say with that. And Darth said, I know. Let's hear what the Universal Translator says. And Darth's mom said, where did you get that? And Darth and Joe said, well, a friend of ours gave it to us. It's a long story, but it translates any language. And now all we have to open it up, it is up and see what the machine has to say. So they opened the cover up, and it said, I'm hungry. Wow, all that for just I'm hungry. Well, I wonder what the alien eats, asked Joe. And there was some food in the room, and they tried offering it carrots and celery and broccoli and tomatoes and Brussels sprouts and ice cream. They started going to the store, and people all over the town started bringing it different kinds of food, but the alien just wouldn't eat anything. Obviously, it missed some kind of food from its own world, and the poor alien and they didn't know how to ask the alien what kind of food, and they kept bringing it, and all of a sudden, they heard some commotion outside. People were shouting and yelling, and Darth and Joe looked out the window, and they saw the train that they had come in. It was whoosh! It was going by at 1,000 miles an hour. And Darth and Joe said, what? Trains don't go that fast. That's the whole problem. Trains don't go fast enough. What's going on? And they ran downstairs and outside. And people were saying, the train, it's out of control, it won't stop. And they ran, and they looking for Super Duper Man, because he might be able to help the day, to help save the day. And they ran around, and they looked, and they knocked on the door of Super Duper Man at the apartment where Mayonnaise Man, Nostril Man, Super Duper Man was staying. And they knocked on the door, and Super Duper Man opened the door, and he was in a bathrobe. He had just taken a shower. And he said, what's the problem? And Darth and Joe said, the train, it's out of control. And Super Duper Man said, well, that's just because Mayonnaise Man, Nostril Man, and I found a way of making the train a lot faster. And Darth and Joe said, what do you mean? What did you do? And Super Duper Man said, well, here was our plan. Mayonnaise Man put a bunch of mayonnaise on the tracks, and Nostril Man blew the mayonnaise down across so it would cover all the tracks. And then I gave the train a big push, and the train whooshed away. And so now it can go really fast. And Darth said, oh no, don't you guys realize there's no way to stop the train now? It's just sliding on the tracks. And Super Duper Man said, oh, we didn't think about how we would stop the train. And they looked outside, and the train, meanwhile, had gone to the end of the tracks and was smashing into the train station. And then It was smashed into a barn. And chickens and roosters and cows were flying into the air, out of the way. And the train smashed out of the other end of the barn through a cornfield, and there was no way of stopping it. It was about to go into the lake, which was very dangerous because there were people aboard this train and they could get hurt. So what are we going to do? So Darth and Joe, quickly, Joe pulled Darth aside and said, "We've got to get some way. We've got to stop that train. It's up to us." And they didn't know what to do, because when Super Duper Man tried getting on behind the train to stop it, he just started sliding on the tracks himself because of all the mayonnaise. And so Darth and Joe thought, maybe our friend Han Solo can help us with the Millennium Falcon. And so they went and got Han, who was vacationing on their planet, coincidentally, and they called up Han. They said, "Hey, Han, we've got an emergency here. There's an out-of-control train. Can you fly the Millennium Falcon over the train, and maybe with some sort of large magnet, like an electromagnet, we can pull the train up off the tracks into the air and save the people on the train?" And but Han said, "Well, you know, I don't think that my Millennium Falcon is strong enough, because if I put a magnet, it'll just pull the Millennium Falcon down to the train, and then it'll be stuck on top of the train and going along with it. But, you know, I was planning, by the time I grow up, to build a much larger Millennium Falcon." Because, see, the thing is that Han Solo, who was only about 7 years old at the time, he had a small Millennium Falcon, like a junior version, but he didn't have a really big one that came later when Star Wars happened. So Darth and Joe said, "Well, you know what we're going to have to do? We're going to have to go to the future and see you in the future and get your large Millennium Falcon and have you fly it there and save the day. But how are we going to get to the future?" And that's when Darth and Joe, of course, said, "Well, we'll have to go visit Dr. Zhivago, because he did have that time machine for going faster than the speed of light. But wait a minute, that only sent us backwards in time." And then Han Solo said, "Well, you know something? I can disable the safety feature on my small Millennium Falcon and have it go faster than the speed of light backwards, which would propel us forward in time. And we can see if I've built the large Millennium Falcon in about 20 years or so." So we could quickly do that. So that seemed like a better solution, because the Millennium Falcon was right there, the small one. So they all got into the small Millennium Falcon. It was a pretty small ship, so it was kind of cramped, and they all squeezed in. And Han disabled the safety feature so that they could go faster than the speed of light, and he put it in reverse. And they went, and they watched the computer, and the dial showed them they had, when they reached 20 years into the future, they stopped. They got out, and they said, "Wait a second, I've got to find myself," said Han. "I've got to find, I mean, I know I live here. I'm 20 years old or somewhere here, but I don't know where I live." And Joe said, "Well, how about on your planet, on Alderaan?" And so yeah, that's an excellent idea, said Han. "I probably still live on Alderaan here 20 years in the future." So they got back in the Millennium Falcon, they flew to Alderaan, and they went to Han Solo's house. And sure enough, there he was. And he said, but he was all grown up. And he said, "Hey, I've been expecting you. I've been waiting for 20 years. And they said, "What do you mean?" And the older Han Solo said, "Well, when I was a kid, when I was 7 years old, I had to go into the future to get the large Millennium Falcon. And so I knew that 20 years later, when I was a grown-up, that I would come as a child and ask for the Millennium Falcon from me. So I've been waiting for me to come. And now I've come, and here I am, and it's nice to meet me." And the big Han Solo shook Hans with the small Han Solo. And then they all got into the big Millennium Falcon, and they flew back to Darth and Joe's planet, but of course they flew backwards in time 20 years so they could get to right when they were having the emergency with the train. And they brought with them a large electromagnet, which they got from a general store, and they flew above the train. And the train, in the meanwhile, was smashing through things, knocking over trees and smashing through a giant piece of glass. And it splinters everywhere, and it was about to fall into a huge body of water, and all the people were in trouble. And they flew the Millennium Falcon overhead, and Hans turned the dial to turn the electromagnetic on. It didn't actually make that sound, but it helps you imagine. The electromagnet pulled the train up in the air, and it got stuck to the bottom of the Millennium Falcon. And everybody looked out, hey, we're in the air, what's going on? And he flew the train off the tracks and placed it down safely on the ground, turned off the electromagnet. They flew back to Han's planet and into the future so that Darth, Joe, and the younger Hans could get the small Millennium Falcon. They flew back to their planet, and then everybody was saved on the train, and Super Duper Man and Mayonnaise Man and Awesome Man said, well, I guess this wasn't a good idea. And so Super Duper Man said, we better get this mayonnaise off the train track so this doesn't happen again, and so I can put the train back on the train track. And so Nostril Man blew all of the mayonnaise so it would fly off the tracks. And the mayonnaise blew into the air and it all landed on the alien's head. And there it was, the mayonnaise was all over the alien's head, and the alien said, and Darth opened up the universal translator device, and the translator said, delicious. Oh, said Darth, that's the alien's food, mayonnaise. That's what he eats on his planet. And so Darth and Joe and all the people on their planet went out and bought lots of mayonnaise, and they fed it to the alien, and everybody lived happily ever after. The end. Well, after that whole alien adventure, Darth and Joe and Darth's mom went back to their house, and that night Darth's mom read them a story. The story was called Darth and Joe in Wonderland, and this is what she said as she read while they were in bed. Once upon a time, Darth and Joe were out walking in the garden when Joe spotted a rabbit running through the woods. So Darth and Joe wanted to see if they could get closer to the rabbit, see what it looked like. So they snuck up behind it, and then they saw it again, and it was further away, and it was running behind from one tree to another, and it was running on its back feet, and it had a little jacket on. And Joe said, "You see that? That rabbit's wearing clothes." And Joe said, "What?" Darth said, "Well, I'm not sure you saw that, right? Rabbits don't wear clothes." Joe said, "I'm sure I saw it." And they saw the rabbit again, and this time they both saw it. The rabbit was wearing a little vest, and was saying, they could hear the rabbit say something, and they couldn't quite hear what it was. They snuck up a little closer, and the rabbit was looking very nervous and running from tree to tree, and the rabbit was saying, I'm late for a very important date." And the rabbit looked at a watch that it pulled out of its pocket, and it put the watch back in its pocket, and it ran on. And so this was obviously a very special rabbit. So Darth and Joe watched it, and it ran behind a little hill, by some more trees, and it went down into a rabbit hole. And Darth and Joe peered inside the hole. It was very dark, but it was just big enough for them to crawl into. So Darth and Joe crawled down into the hole after the rabbit. And they were in this room. It was kind of dark and wet. And they looked around, and they couldn't see the rabbit. But then in the far wall, they saw the rabbit running again. I'm late for a very important date." And they ran after the rabbit this time because they really wanted to see where the rabbit was going. And they ended up in this room, and there was a light on in this room, and there was a table, and on the table was a glass that had some blue drink in it. And there was this little sign by the glass, and the sign said, "Drink me." So Darth and Joe said, "Well, do you think we should drink it?" And Joe said, "What could it hurt?" And so they both took a sip of the blue liquid from the glass, and suddenly they both shrunk down very, 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 very tiny until they were about the size of the rabbit, or maybe even a little bit smaller. And then they saw the rabbit was walked it through a doorway, and so they followed the rabbit through the door. And they said, "Excuse me, Mr. Rabbit, where are you going?" And the rabbit said, I'm late for a very important date." And they said, "What date?" "No time to talk, no time to talk." And the rabbit ran off, and so they ran after the rabbit, and soon they found themselves in some woods. But these weren't like the woods that were up above ground. These were really strange woods. The trees were all blue and purple and had little yellow acorns stuck to them, and acorns were actually made out of eggs and corn, and they were this big, beautiful fruit that you could pluck off the corn and eat it, and then you could just fry the egg and eat that. So they were really very useful trees if you were hungry. And they were walking around, and that's when they saw somebody sitting on a fence. And they walked over, and you know who was on the fence? It was Trioculus. And then the rabbit came up from behind them and started singing a little song. And it was describing what was going on. The rabbit said, "Trioculus, Trioculus sat on a wall. Trioculus, Trioculus had a great fall. Ow, my head!" All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Trioculus back together again. And when he said that, when he sang that little song, Trioculus fell off the wall. Ow, my head! And broke into 1,000,000 pieces. And all the king's horses and all the king's men came, and they couldn't put Trioculus back together again. "So what date are you late for?" asked Joe to the rabbit. And the rabbit said, "Well, I'm late for a tea date. We're all going over and we're drinking tea. Would you like to come with us? We're going to have a little tea party." And so they thought that was a great idea. So they walked over to a table where there were a bunch of people sitting at the table. One of the people was Smorville, who in a previous adventure was in the in-between universe, and Amanda, who they had given ice cream to a long time ago in the in-between universe. And the rabbit sat down there, and Darth and Joe, and they all sat around the table, and they passed tea and poured cups, and they drank tea, and they had a very nice time and talked about the weather. And that's when they noticed that there was a plate of mushrooms on the table, and Darth and Joe asked the rabbit if those were good mushrooms to eat, and the rabbit said, "Well, they taste good." And so Joe grabbed a handful of them and ate them before the rabbit could say, "But wait a minute!" And it was too late. All of a sudden, Joe started growing. He grew and grew and grew, and pretty soon he was 10 feet tall. And since his table was indoors, his head was hitting the ceiling, and he was all hunched over. But he kept growing until his arms stuck out the window of the house, and he couldn't even move. And the rest of the people in the room were all squished and had to crawl out from underneath Joe because he was so giant. And Darth Vader asked, "Is there any way that we can make him small again?" And the rabbit said, "Oh, I'm afraid you'll have to drink some of the blue potion. That's the only thing that can shrink him down." But Darth wasn't even sure where that was. That's where they came in, but he didn't know his way back. And so the rabbit said, "Well, I'll take you to go get the blue potion, but actually I can't go there with you. I'll just point you in the right direction because I'm late for another date. So just come down this path over here," and Darth followed him, "and go down that road, and then you see that doorway over there next to the big tree. It looks like it's a door right into a rock. That's where you came out of, and the blue potion's right in there." And so Darth walked down the path. He walked toward the blue door, and then the strangest thing, he saw a smile floating above the branch of a tree. And it was a smile, but there was no face or body attached to it. And he said, "Excuse me, I can't help but notice that you have no body. You're just a floating smile. Who are you?" And the smile said, "I'm the Cheshire Zhivago, and I live up in this tree. And would you like to see me?" And Darth said yes. And so the smile turned into a whole person. And sure enough, it was Dr. Zhivago. And he was sitting up in the tree. And Darth said, "My friend Joe Vader, he's 10 feet tall or even bigger, and he's stuck in the house over there where the rabbit was having a tea party with Smorville and Amanda. And I was just looking for some blue potion to make him small again." And Dr. Zhivago said, "Oh, well, why don't you follow me, and I'll take you there." And Darth said, "Well, isn't it just inside this room over here?" And Dr. Zhivago said, "Yes, it is, but I don't think you want to go that way because there's a monster in there." "A monster? What kind of a monster lives inside that room? There wasn't any monster there when we were there before. And, well, Dr. Zhivago said, yes, well, it's a monster that's only there when you're not there. And Darth said, well, if it's there when I'm not there, well, then if I go into the room, it won't be there, right? And Dr. Zhivago said, that's a fascinating idea. All I know is that there's a monster there now, so you might get eaten if you go inside the room now. But then Darth said, but the monster won't be there if I go inside, right? And Dr. Zhivago agreed that must be the right way. And so Darth opened up the door, and sure enough, the monster wasn't there. Instead, there was a walrus who was sitting at the table with the blue potion, and Darth asked if he could borrow the blue potion, and the walrus handed it to him. And Darth ran back with it down the path to the house, and by this time, the house was... Joe had grown so big that the house looked like a little hat that was stuck on his head, and Joe was reaching way up to the sky. His head was bumping into a cloud, and Joe reached down and grabbed the potion and drank some of it, and he shrunk back down to normal size. Well, normal for them, but they were both shrunk as small as a rabbit. But at least this way they could find their way out again, which they did. They found their way out of this world, and they thanked the rabbit whom they came across, he was running off to another date, for a very fine adventure. And Joe grabbed a couple of small pieces of mushroom, so that when they came out of the rabbit hole and they were back in their world, and they were only the size of a rabbit, they both ate a piece of mushroom each, and they grew back up to their normal size, except they were just ended up a couple inches taller than they were when they started at the very beginning. And so when they went home, their mother said, "Hey, there's something different about you two. You seem like you've grown." And Darth and Joe said, "Well, we're only 3 and 5 years old. We're growing pretty fast now, so that's probably what it was." And because he thought that she would never believe him about the mushrooms and the blue potion and everything that happened. And so they went to bed and fell asleep. The end. Okay, this is another story about Darth and Joe Vader. Back when Joe was about 3 years old and Darth was 5 years old. Joe was staying over at Darth's house, and they were out looking for fossils and shells down near the creek that was behind the house. There's a hill behind the house, and then there was a creek that ran through some water, and there's a little bit of water through it, and you could find old fossils that were millions of years old, and they were looking, and also for geodes, when Joe said, "Hey, Darth, look at this creek. Didn't the water used to flow from left to right? I mean, the water used to come from down there, up there, and flow that way. But today it's going the other direction." And Darth said, "You're right. You're right, Joe. The water is flowing the wrong direction." And that seemed very strange to both of them, because the water always flows. Well, what happens is the water flows from a high place to a low place, right? Because of gravity pulls it down. This didn't make any sense. And so they decided to walk up the creek to see if they could find an explanation of why the water was flowing the wrong direction. And that's when Joe pointed up in the air and said, "Hey, that bird." "Yeah? It's flying backwards." And sure enough, there was a blackbird, and it was flying backwards, and it landed in a nest, and it took food out of its baby's mouth instead of putting it in. Everything was going backwards. This was very confusing. And so Darth and Joe knew that something was extremely wrong. And they looked around back toward the house, and the birds were flying in the right direction. And everywhere else they looked, things were okay. But around this area, around the creek, everything was backwards. They saw a squirrel. Squirrel ran backwards and then ran up the tree, tail first. And the squirrel put a nut back onto a tree instead of taking a nut off a tree to take home with it. Everything was going backwards. And so Darth and Joe said, something is seriously wrong. What could it be? And then they saw this man standing just a little way, about 20 feet away in the woods. And he had a hat on with a bunch of question marks on the hat. And they walked up to him and said, "Excuse me, who are you? We haven't seen you here before." And the man said, "I'm the doctor." And Darth said, "Doctor who?" And the man said, "Exactly." And Joe said, "Doctor who?" "Yes," said the man. The doctor. "Well, what are you doing in our backyard?" And the doctor said, "Well, there's been a time anomaly." "What?" "Well, you see, I'm a Time Lord. I travel forward and backward in time. I'm an expert in time, and something's seriously wrong here in your backyard. This is your backyard, is that correct?" And Darth and Joe said, "Yes." "Well, I've noticed that things are going backwards, and I've just been taking some measurements with my machines." "Well, why are things going backwards?" "Well, that's just the point," said the doctor. "It seems that another universe has intersected with your universe. That is, an entire universe where time runs backwards compared to your universe has somehow got too close to your universe and is touching right here in your backyard. I've been tracking it for some time. It didn't used to be in your backyard where the two universes were touching, but now it's the parts where they're touching have grown larger, and the backwards universe seems to be taking over your universe, and quite frankly, you're in big trouble. Because what's going to happen is that everything will start going backwards, and pretty soon your planet will start spinning backwards, and all the old people will grow young, and then they'll be babies, and then they'll go back into their mother's wombs, and then they'll be unborn, and then the planet will go backwards in time, and it will be unformed, and it will just turn into dust that it used to be before it turned into a planet. I mean, this is a very serious situation," said the doctor. And so Darth and Joe offered to help, and they said, we've saved our planet on a number of occasions when the internal clock was messed up in the center of the planet, and when an evil person named Trioculus and his son were trying to heat up our sun by speeding up the nuclear reactions in the sun with a green ray, and we saved the planet then. So we'd like to help save the planet this time too. And the doctor said, "Well, it's more than just your planet. It's your whole universe that's in trouble, and I will help you too, because after all, I'm a Time Lord, and I know about these things. But we need to stop, first of all, before we even solve the problem, we need to stop it from spreading, because if it gets any bigger, all sorts of things will happen backwards. For instance, if you walk into that stream, and then it's a good thing that you didn't, pretty soon you'll be walking, and you'll be walking right back out of the stream again. It's quite a confusing situation for many people when time starts going backwards. For instance, you've eaten breakfast today. Well, if you walk into that backwards area, you'll be hungry again because you will have uneaten breakfast. The eggs will go back into their shells. The stove will uncook them. Everything will happen backwards. So we've got to do something right away to stop this from spreading. And Darth said, well, what can we do? And the doctor said, "Well, we're going to have to get the advice of Mr. E." And Joe said, "Who's Mr. E?" And Dr. Who said, "Well, it's a big mystery. Nobody really knows, but he's a friend of mine nonetheless. And would you like to come with me in my TARDIS?" "Your what?" "My TARDIS. That's my ship that flies through time and space. It's right over here." And he pointed, and over up on the hill near their house, they hadn't noticed it before, was what looked like a telephone booth. It was a red booth that looked like the sort of about as big as a closet, not very big for three people. And Darth and Joe looked at each other and thought, that doesn't look like a spaceship. And Doctor Who said, "Well, come on up. We'll go inside it and we'll go give Mr. E a visit and take care of this situation here with time on your planet. For once, time is not on our side, so we'd better hurry up." So they got into the TARDIS, and when they opened up the door of this, what looked like a telephone booth, it was actually a lot bigger on the inside, and it was an entire spaceship with a control panel and separate rooms for doing different experiments and sleeping in, and Doctor Who started it up, and they started flying into space, and soon they landed on the planet Quaxar. Quaxar was a planet made out of marshmallow-looking rocks. and they landed on the rocks, which were a little spongy, so you had to get used to the fact that when you walked, you sank into the rocks just a little bit, about a foot deep, you know. But it was a tasty planet because you could actually, the rocks had a lot of minerals in them, which were nutritious. So if you got hungry and you needed some nutrition, you could reach down and eat part of the rocks. But Doctor Who said not to do that too much because it might give you a stomach ache unless you were able to eat some of the syrup that flowed out of the trees on the planet, but they were in too much of a hurry to do that. So they stopped at Mr. E's house and walked in, and it was kind of dark, and the doctor said that Mr. E lives in the dark, partly because he's so mysterious and nobody really knows who he is. So Doctor Who said, "Excuse me, Mr. E." And a voice said, "Yes." "Is that the doctor?" "Why, yes it is, and I brought two friends of mine. What are your names again?" I'm Darth Vader, and this is Joe, my cousin, Joe Vader." "Oh, well, my name is Mr. E," said the voice. "How can I help you today?" And the doctor said, "Well, we have a slight problem. Actually, it's not so slight. A huge backwards running universe has intersected or overlapped with our forward running universe, relatively speaking, and it's causing time to run backwards on these two young lads' planet. And it's quite an emergency situation. We'd like to keep it from growing any larger until I'm able to solve the problem." And Mr. E said, "What would you like from me?" And Doctor Who said, "Well, you're pretty good with force fields, aren't you?" And Mr. E said, "Well, I've had some experience with force fields, yes." And the doctor said, "If you could give us some sort of device that could put a force field around that part of their planet which is now running backwards in time, that will keep it from growing any larger until we can solve the problem." And Mr. E was happy to oblige, to help out, and he gave them a small device which was, it looked like a little marble. It was very tiny, but as Doctor Who pointed out, it was much bigger on the inside. And he said, "Just use this, draw a line around the area that's running backwards in time, and it will keep any intersecting universe from growing larger at that point, but it will only last about 15 minutes because universes are quite powerful, and it will run out of energy at that point. So hopefully that will give you enough time to solve the problem." And Doctor Who thanked him, and all three of them got back in the TARDIS, flew back to Darth and Joe's planet, and by this time the backwards part of the planet, Doctor Who noted with his instruments, had grown quite a bit larger and was almost to their house. And in fact, their mother, who was out in the yard gardening, Doctor Who said, "Don't go too close to her, she's inside the backwards part." And sure enough, she was putting weeds back into the ground, and she was taking seeds that she was planting out of the ground. And as soon as she saw Darth and Joe, she said, and Joe said, "What is she saying?" And the doctor said, "Well, she's speaking backwards, so it's a little difficult to understand her. She said something about washing your hands before you ate dinner. But actually, she's unspoke it, and she's in a dangerous situation because she is your mother, is that correct?" And Darth said, "Yes." "Well, if she stays in the backwards part of the universe for too long, she will unhave you as children, and you'll go back into her and turn back into nothing where you came from before you were born, and we wouldn't want that to happen." And Darth and Joe agreed. That's quite a serious situation. So the doctor said, "We don't have much time to lose. Actually, we have all the time in the world. What we're going to have to do is get into the TARDIS and figure out what this problem is. We're going to have to go into the backwards universe." And Darth and Joe said, "Well, wait, we can't go into the backwards universe. We'll fly backwards. We won't be able to get anything done. Everything will be undone." But the doctor assured them that while they're in the TARDIS, in his flying machine, they have a special shield around them, and time for them will continue to go forward, and they'll be able to navigate through the backwards universe with no problem. So they got inside of the TARDIS, and he fired it up, started up the engines, whoosh, and flew up in the air and right into the negative, that is to say, the backwards part of their backyard. And by this time, But before they did that, of course, the doctor put aimed the marble around the entire area that was backwards, so that there was a big force build up, so that the universe, the backwards part of the universe, which was in their backyard with the creek, would not grow any larger. So for 15 minutes, so they had 15 minutes to go solve the problem before their entire planet would be swallowed up by backwards time, and pretty soon the whole universe would start going backwards, and then they'd all be in trouble. And so they went into the backwards universe. And the doctor said, well, what we have to do is we have to go to the center of this universe, which shouldn't be much of a problem, and figure out why it's colliding with our forward-running universe. Because normally there's plenty of room in the heavens for universes to keep from hitting each other, and it's quite unusual, quite uncommon for two universes to bump into each other like this. Something must be wrong. And so he used the controls of the TARDIS, his time machine spaceship, to fly toward the center of the backwards running universe, and they saw all sorts of interesting things on the way. They saw spaceships flying backwards. They saw there was a fight between two spaceships, and the laser beams were coming backwards out of one ship, back into the guns where they came from. A ship that had blown up was being put back together because everything was happening backwards. Things were falling up instead of down. Things were going backwards instead of forwards. People were talking backwards because that's how people lived in the backwards universe. They started off very old and they got younger and younger and younger until they were born, and they were unborn. And but to them, everything seemed normal. In fact, the people who normally live in the backwards universe, our forward running universe seems backwards to them. So they continued to fly through this universe to the center of it, which took about 7 minutes because the doctor had a very fast ship in the TARDIS, which could fly. It used time as fuel to fly, which made it extremely fast. They flew to the center of the universe, and the doctor looked at some instruments and realized the problem was the polarity of the universe. Now, polarity. What is polarity? A magnet has two poles, a north pole and a south pole, or a positive and a negative. And if you aim two magnets together, they'll either get sucked toward each other, they'll be attracted, or they'll push away from each other. And if two magnets are attracted to each other, and then you turn one of them over, reversing the polarity, they'll get pushed away. So the doctor realized that all we had to do was reverse the polarity of this universe, so that instead of being attracted to our forward universe, it would be repelled, it would be pushed away, and it would go away from our universe, and there would be no more collisions in the future. So the Doctor Who started flying around the center of the universe and using the instruments of his ship, and managed to reverse the polarity with special time machine devices that he had, because he is a Time Lord and he's an expert at controlling time in this matter, and actually the polarity of a universe in terms of its time flow, and its attraction to other universes. So he reversed the polarity of this universe so that it would start repelling and pushing away from the forward universe, and then they flew back to the forward moving universe just in time to get back into it before the two universes pushed far apart, and they landed back in the backyard of Darth and Joe, and it turned out, and they went and saw if their mother was all right, and she said, yes, well, and they asked if they were late for dinner, and she said, no, I haven't started making dinner yet, which was kind of funny because she actually had made dinner before, and that's why they were told to wash their hands, but since she had gone backwards in time for about half an hour, she didn't remember that she unmade dinner, so she had to make it again. So in any case, everything worked out all right, and the doctor gave Darth and Joe his calling card, which it looked like a piece of paper, a little piece of paper with a number on it, and any time they needed Doctor Who, all they had to do was call that number, and he would come if there was an emergency, especially one involving time, and he would help them out. The end. Speaking of time, there's not much time left on this cassette tape, but you can control time on this cassette by making it run backwards, rewinding it, or making it run forward, or you can turn the cassette over and listen to the stories on the other side. But there is a little bit of time left for a short story. It goes like this. Once upon a time, the end. There seems to be a little bit more time left on the end of this side of the tape, so I'll sing you guys a little song. It goes something like this. Well, I've been building a building, boom, fixing some fixings, boom. This is the end of this song. Okay, well, actually, it looks like there's time for one more story on this side of the tape. So I'll tell you one more Darth and Joe story. This is a little bit later when Darth is 6 years old and his cousin Joe is 4 years old, and they decided to go on a trip with their friends Super Duper Man, Nostril Man, and Mayonnaise Man, along with their new friend Luke Skywalker, who had his own spaceship. So they took off in Luke Skywalker's spaceship, and they decided to oh wait, I'm sorry, someone's at the door, just a second. Hello, who is it?
My name is Monoculus.
Monoculus? What are you doing here?
I've come to get you.
You can't get me. I'm getting out of here.
There's no place you can hide.
Yes, there is. I'm getting to the other side of the tape. Quick, everybody, get to the other side of the tape.